Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Dani and today it's time to talk about my reading from 2021. So we're going to talk about stats, we're going to talk about what I read each month, my favorite and least favorite books of each month, and just everything about how my reading went last year. So first let me move here to the side a little bit so we have space to show things on the side. So we're first going to look at Goodreads and then my spreadsheet, which combines two different spreadsheets, and I'm going to explain all of that. But first, let's check Goodreads. I try to make sure that Goodreads was always up to date. I reviewed all of the books that I read on Goodreads last year. I tried to have the right edition, so I do have the right number of pages, but for audiobooks, for example, they count the pages in my spreadsheet. I didn't count the pages, I count the hours listened, so it's going to be a little bit different, but just let's see what it says here. So I read 65 books last year, which is less than I would have wanted, but I read 65 books, and according to Goodreads, I read 24,315 pages. The shortest book I read was Life is Strange Volume 1, which is a graphic novel, and the longest book I read was The Way of Kings in the leather-bound edition, which has 1,206 pages. Life is Strange has just 112 pages. The average length of the books that I read was 374 pages. The most popular book I read, so the book that I read last year that most people have also read on Goodreads, was The Hobbit. It makes a lot of sense. And the least popular book was Fullmetal Alchemist Volume 14, which also makes a lot of sense because they have these editions separate from the other normal Fullmetal Alchemist editions. So it makes sense that not a lot of people will have gotten to volume 14 of this specific edition. And my average rating for the year was 3.9, which is really high, and I'm very happy about it. I will try to keep increasing this average rating every year, but 3.9 is really good. I think it's the highest that I've ever had. And then that's pretty much it for Goodreads. But I also learned that Goodreads has another page called Reading Stats that compares a bunch of different years. So you can see here that on 2019 I read 82 books, 2020 89, and 2021 65. So it's cool to compare like different years. And also the number of pages. As you can see there, I read almost 30,000 pages on 2020 and then 24,000 pages on 2021, which is not a big difference. 5,000 pages? I guess it is a big difference. But for the amount of the difference of number of books that I read, I think it's not very high. Because I read bigger books in 2021, probably. I don't know, but it is just a fun stat. So now let's go into my spreadsheet. Like I said, I combined two different spreadsheets, the one that Ali created and the one that G created. So I'm gonna link both of her channels down in the description. And I used G's, the Copile spreadsheet for a while, and then I found out about Ali's, and I really like how many other forms of tracking there are there. So I just combined them both and I created not my own because it's pretty much a combination of both of them, but I did put some things that are my own. So for example, last year I wasn't using the exact Copile method that G created. So Copile, each letter stands for one different thing in the book that you would track. So characters, atmosphere, writing, and things like that. And it's a really cool system, but I wanted to use a different type, like track different things in the books. I don't have a cool acronym or anything, but I was tracking different things in the books. But kind of the system is the same, in which I would get a rounded rating at the end of that rating. This is really hard to explain. I'm going to put here an image so you understand what I'm talking about. But yes, so I used both of those and I combined it, and I also added some tracking that I wanted. So for example, I have tracking for the average rating of adult books that I read, average rating for fantasy books that I read, and things like that, just to see what would happen, just to have fun and see if that meant anything in the end. And one other thing that I changed is that I have two different columns for different types of tracking. So for example, I have genre tracking, and I have format, not format necessarily, but just like another column that says if it is a graphic novel, if it's a manga, if it's something else, because a manga can be fantasy. Manga is not a genre for me, so I track those two things separately. But first, let's start with each month of the year. So in January, I read 3 books, which was a total of 635 pages. and an average rating of 3.67, which is not a lot, like not a lot of books, not a lot of pages. So my favorite book from January was a reread, and which was Fables Volume 1, and my least favorite book from January was Frankenstein, which was a 2-star for me, which is just very boring book. I like the idea, but I didn't like reading the book. In February, I read 6 books, a total of 1,964 pages and an average rating of 3.58, and I also listened to 13 hours of audiobook. My favorite book in February was Full Metal Alchemist Volume 12, which is not fair because I gave all of them 5 stars because I love the series so much. And all of the others were pretty much 3-point-something stars, so not much of a favorite in February, unfortunately. And my least favorite book in February was probably Game Changer because it was mostly a disappointment more than a bad book. I was just expecting a lot because it's Neil Schusterman, but it was a really big disappointment for me. In March, I read 3 books again, 940 pages, and an average rating of 4.17, which is a higher average rating. My favorite book from March was Realm Breaker by Victoria Aveyard, and I'm really excited to continue this series. And my least favorite book, I don't have a least favorite book here. I really enjoyed both of the other 2 books that I read. If I would say, I think they're very different. They're very, very different. So between the 2 fantasy books that I read, I preferred Realm Breaker, but I still want to continue with A Natural History of Dragons as well. So I don't know, no least favorite here. In April, I read 6 books, 1,920 pages with an average rating of 3.5, which is not great. My favorite book in April was Vicious, and my least favorite had quite a few. Lore, I think, was my least favorite. House of Hollow was a big disappointment. Husband's Secret, also I didn't like that much. But I think Lore because it was bad and a disappointment at the same time. Even if it wasn't the lowest rating, well, it was one of the lowest rating. So yes, Lore. Lore was the least favorite book from April. In May, I read 7 books, 3,254 pages, but there's a reason for that. And the average rating was 3.9, which is really high. So what happened in May is that I finished The Way of Kings. I didn't start The Way of Kings in May, but I finished it. I read maybe half of it in May. And that I counted all the pages for The Way of Kings in May, so that's why I have such a high page count for this month, but it doesn't mean that I read all of those pages in the month of May. But my favorite book for the month was The Way of Kings. But I had so many 5 stars. The 5th season and The Ones We're Meant to Find were also amazing books that I love so much. It's some of my favorites of the year, so it was probably the best month of the year in terms of finding 5-star reads. But The Way of Kings was my favorite for sure. And then my least favorite was The Secret Garden. No doubt. Secret Garden was really bad, boring, disappointing, racist, and just not a good time. In June, I read 7 books again, 904 pages, and let me check. Yes, there's also a reason why it's like not a lot of pages, and an average rating of 4.3, which is one of the highest. But what happened in June is that I read all of Heartstopper on Webtoon, and I counted the books read because Heartstopper was first published on Webtoon online for free. You can read that there. But they also published the books, and I wanted to track that I had read those stories, and I didn't have a way to track like Webtoon reads, so I put them as books. But I didn't count the pages because I didn't read them in pages, if that makes sense. So I have 7 books, but not a lot of pages. My favorite books from the month of June were Full Metal Alchemist, again, Volume 13, and Heartstopper Volume 1. It was just so cute and awesome and wholesome, and I would recommend to anyone because it was really good. And again, you can just read them on Webtoon. And my least favorite book was You Must Not Miss by Katrina Leno. Huge disappointment because it sounded a lot like Horrid, which is one of my favorite books. And it just was more of a fantasy than... everything was too well explained for my taste, from what I expected from that book. So my least favorite book there. In July, I read 8 books, 2,607 pages, with an average rating of 3.9, which is really good. It's my average rating of the year, so that's good. My favorite book for July, Project Hail Mary. no doubt. But I also had some other favorites here. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, one of my favorite YA thrillers, one of my favorite thrillers I've ever read. The Last Beautiful Girl was such a nice surprise. I really loved that book so much. So those three were definitely in the top of my best books of the year. But Project Hail Mary was pretty much like tied with The Way of Kings as the best book of the year. So definitely Project Hail Mary. And my least favorite book of the year was not a lot of bad books here. Obsidio disappointed me a lot, but I think I would say Fireborn because, again, I was expecting more and it was just normal, everyday YA fantasy that I didn't really care about. The characters didn't care about much of what happened and I don't want to continue the series. So my least favorite, but not that it was a bad book. It was a really good reading month. August I read 3 books, 961 pages with an average rating of 2.6, which was the worst month of the year for my reading, for sure. Oh my god. My favorite book was The Effort with a 3.5 rating. It was a really good book, not a standout for the year, but it was really good. And my least favorite, this month has 2 of my least favorite books of the year, but for sure Central Park. I gave it 1 star, so it was one of my least favorite, just not believable, that book didn't make any sense at all. In September, I read 5 books, 1,520 pages with an average rating of 4.1, which is really good, higher than the average of the year. My favorite was The Maidens, which is a very unpopular opinion because I know everyone hated that book, but I really loved it. I had so much fun. I just thought it was a fun time. Not very believable, had its issues, but I still gave it 5 stars. I just had a lot of fun with it. And the least favorite book was Preludes and Nocturnes, which is the first volume in Sandman, which was a reread for me. And it's just, I don't think this series, I want to watch the TV show when it comes out, but I don't think the comics are for me. I get really lost in what's going on there. I just don't understand anything, and I don't know, just really not for me. October, I read 5 books, 2,490 pages, which is a lot, with an average rating of 4, exactly 4. And my favorite book of October was Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. Again, one of my favorite books of the year for sure. It was just so much fun. I loved that story so much, and I hate how it's going downhill since the first book, but I have high hopes for the last one. Skyward is really, really good. And my least favorite book for October was To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, unfortunately. Another sci-fi, so the top and the lower book are sci-fis here, but To Sleep in a Sea of Stars is just unnecessarily long and boring, and the pacing is just off, and I just didn't like it. November, I read 6 books, 2,161 pages, and an average rating of 4 again. My favorite book from November was Keeper of the Lost Cities by Shannon Messenger. It's the first in a fantasy middle grade series that I am obsessed about now, and I just really want to continue the series, and I'm so happy there are like 14? No, I think there are 9 books out for me to read, and it was really a lot of fun. And my least favorite book from November was Cinders and Sparrows, another fantasy middle grade, which didn't make a lot of sense and was not really good. And December, finally, I read 6 books again, 1,598 pages, and my average rating was 3. Not exactly 3.08. My favorite book in December was Amari and the Night Brothers, another middle grade fantasy, just so cute and so much fun, and another series that I will definitely continue, and I already pre-ordered the next book. It's going to be, I just can't wait to continue the series. It was really good. It was the last book that I read in the year, and it was good just to end the year on a high note with a 5 stars. And my least favorite book of December was As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson, the 3rd book in the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, which was just, I will just forget that this book existed. It was really bad. If you want to hear my thoughts, I will link my birthday vlog where I read this book, where I finished this book and ranted about it for a while because it's really bad. And that's it for my monthly stats. Now let's check the year stats, which is the most fun part, I think. Like I said, on Goodreads it said that I read 24,000 pages roughly, but I actually read 20,954 pages in the year in those 65 books. I don't have how many hours I listened to as in audiobooks. Let me get that information for you. I listened to 73.5 hours of audiobook. Not a lot. I was listening to maybe one audiobook a month. Not even that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I only listen to 6 audiobooks in the year. So one every 2 months. I was almost like I always had one audiobook going on during the month, but I don't have a lot of time to just stop and listen to audiobooks. So I would take maybe 2 months to finish each audiobook, probably something like that. And then as you can see here, the number of books I read each month varied a lot, and the number of pages I read also varied a lot. We had that Heartstopper thing in which I didn't count the pages, so I have a lot of books, not a lot of pages, but it's really cool to see the graphs and how they compare to each other. Most of the books I read were in the range of 300 and 400 pages, which makes a lot of sense. Then I read 50% of young adult books, 38% of adult books, and 10% middle grade. So definitely more young adult, and that's unexpected, but again, we have Heartstopper, which is 4 books that are all just young adult. Full Metal Alchemist, I always also put them all as young adult, and that takes a big chunk of my young adult reading, so it makes sense, I guess. I would think that there would be more adult books. Next year, well, this year, 2022, there will be more adult books for sure, because I'm planning on reading a lot of adult thrillers. Now, going to the genre graph, I read 25 fantasy books, which is 38% of my total reading, 29% sci-fi, and 10% contemporary, which is a lot of the Heartstoppers there, and another 3 books, which I don't know what they were, and 18% thrillers. I want to make this percentage higher for thrillers and for sci-fi, but makes sense that I read more fantasy. Those are my 3 favorite genres: sci-fi, fantasy, and thrillers. Thriller, horror, mystery, I kind of put them all together because I can't always separate them. So those are all in the thriller category, but those are my 3 favorite genres, so it makes a lot of sense that they would have the largest pieces of the pie. And contemporary probably won't keep being this big of a pie size, but we have it there because of Heartstopper. It was 7 contemporaries, like I said. Only 3 of them were like actual other books that I read throughout the year. There was not a webtoon, but it's a really cool graph. And one other thing that I wanted to track this year was, like I said, the average rating for each genre. So my average rating for my fantasy books were 3.87, and my average rating for sci-fi was 3.78, and my average rating for thriller, horror, mystery was 3.6. So all of them were lower than my year average rating, which is weird, and I don't know why that is. Okay, I know why that is. I'm just checking my graph for the star ratings, and on Goodreads we don't have half stars, and on my spreadsheet I had half stars. I don't know if I had like I was breaking down more than that. I think I was just breaking down by half stars, and my actual average rating in the year was not 3.9, it was 3.79, so 3.8 if we're rounding up. So it makes a little bit more sense. Well, it's just 0.1 of a difference, but it makes a little bit more sense now that those were the average ratings by genre that I read. But again, as you can see in the star rating pie chart, I gave 5 stars to 17% of the books that I read, 4.5 to 20% of the books that I read, 4 stars to 19% of the books that I read. So over 50% of the books were 4 stars or higher, which is really nice. That's definitely really good, and that makes the average be really high. And I hope it continues like that. I hope like maybe 75% of the books that I read are over 4 stars. That would be really good. Like, I always read books thinking that I'm going to love them, hoping that I'm going to give it at least 4 or above stars, but of course sometimes that doesn't happen as well as we would expect. Who would have known that I would give 1 star to the end of my favorite YA thriller series, which was Good Girls Guide to Murder. But that's what we have. I also have the breakdown of the year of publication of the books that I read, and from the 65 books, 24 were published in 2021, so a lot of new releases. And then you can see the rest of the breakdown there. A lot of them 2020, some older ones from 2010 to 2018 that we have like 16 books. So there's a lot of variety. There are not a lot of older books, like only 4 books. They're like classics maybe, before 1960. And funnily enough, this is very interesting, the highest average rating for the years of publication was from 2015 to 2018. I don't know why that is, but from the 8 books that I read, the average rating was 4.25, which is really high. So I should be reading more books from that time period? I don't know. Is there any that you would recommend to me? And then finally, just some other stats that don't really mean anything, but it's fun to look at. The amount of pages that I read means that in average I read 57 pages per day, which is definitely not true. There are a lot of days that I didn't read anything, a lot of days that I read, I don't know, over 200 pages, who knows, but in average that would mean 57 pages. And per month that means 1,746 pages, which is also not true when you look at, for example, The Way of Kings, which I put all of the 1,000 over pages in 1 month, and that skewed that month to have more pages read than the others, but in average that would be 1,700 pages. And it also means 5.42 books per month, which is good. I'm still doing my M&ms CBR, but I was doing it with 5 books last year, and I didn't always get to those 5 books. There were maybe 2 or 3 months a year that I read only 3 books, and maybe I wasn't getting to all the books on my M&ms CBR, but I did read over 5 books a month on average, so that's really good. If you're still here with me, we're going to go into very tiny, minute, like very specific stats now, which is, I loved tracking all of this because I love seeing it at the end of the year. But let's see how many series I started in 2021. Oh my god, this is not good. Okay, it's so much more than I thought. I started 22 series last year. That's a lot. Let's see how many series I finished. I think it's 1, but let's check. 2. I finished 2 series. I started 22 and I finished 2 series. There are just so many cool new books coming out all the time. That's not even true because I read a lot of old published books that I just didn't continue with the series, like Way of Kings, 5th season, and just so many others that I started and never continued, never finished. But now I have my planner, I have everything written down, and I'm going to focus on those series. The ones that I want to finish, of course. There are a lot of that I started that I just don't intend to continue. Let's see how many I do intend to continue from those 22. Well, I started and finished A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, so that cancels each other out. 10. Of the 22 series that I started, I finished 1, and I intend to continue with 10 of them. Some of them are just series that started that I'm going to, like Amari and the Night Brothers. The 2nd book is coming out this year and I'm going to continue with it, so there's no way for me to have continue with it before, but there are many others that already have 2nd, 3rd books published that I should focus on them and I should try to finish them. But yes, 10 of those 22 I want to continue, and the others I just don't care enough. And of the 65 books that I read, 28 were standalones. So at least not committing myself to more series there, but there were also middle books that I read from series, but 28 were standalones. 31 of the books that I read, so almost half of them, were from new authors, so it was pretty much a split from new authors and authors that I have read before. The series that I continued, of course, would have been authors that I have read before because I read the first books in the series by them, but 31 were new authors for me. There are some other stuff that I tracked, for example, where did the book come from, if it was books that I just purchased or if it was books that I already had on my bookshelf or from the library or from the publisher and things like that, but it became a little bit confusing there because I didn't know anymore how to define which were the books that I already had previously on my bookshelf, if it would be any book that I bought in the previous year, but if I was reading in December a book that I purchased in January, it feels like it's already a book that I had for a long time. So I didn't know exactly how to track those things, but I'm going to put here just books that I owned or books that I got from the publisher, which again, it's books that I own in a way or another, even if it's from NetGalley or a physical ARC, but they would be in the publisher category, and then books that I got from the library, which is probably not a lot, but again, working from home, I don't have a lot of time to read. I don't have like commute time to listen to audiobooks, which I usually listen with my library, but I don't have a lot of time for that. So it makes sense that the library wouldn't be too big of a number. But again, that's what I read between comparing what I owned by purchasing or by gifted books or something like that, and from the publisher and library. Maybe I'll split in some other types of categories as well. Well, you can see it here. So let me know how many books you read in 2021 and what was your average rating for those books. If you have a difference, like if you have your own spreadsheet, or if you just looking on Goodreads or another reading tracking website that you have, and let me know what was your average rating for the year and if you want to increase that number or not. I really do, because of course I want to keep reading more books that I love. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for joining me. Bye!